Hey guys, tonight we're leaving behind the softness of modern pillows and the familiar hum of machines to step gently into a world where time drifts as slowly as the twilight. The Mediterranean breeze, salty and warm, wraps around your skin like a sun-dried linen cloth, while the sky hovers between the pink glow of day's end and the waiting hush of night. In that fragile moment, the whole world seems to hold its breath, and you're simply there, present, in the final sigh of a day now gone. Before we drift deeper into the quiet, if you find journeys like this worth a moment of your time, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, an attic room, a still warm kitchen, or simply your own bed, leave a comment and let me know where you are, and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Turn on a fan if you'd like a gentle breeze in the background. Close your eyes if it feels comfortable. We're about to cross together that blurred boundary between day and night, between the world of now and the place where ancient memories live. This is no ordinary coast. It is not the kind tourists visit now, lined with plastic chairs and the distant hum of traffic. This is a shore that has quietly slipped through the cracks of history, dissolved beneath the weight of time and tides. A forgotten place, no longer marked on maps. Kept alive only in myth and the faint shimmer of starlight. You are standing where once stood the ancient Phoenician coast, a strip of land where time did not rush but moved slowly, to the rhythm of tide and trade, of sails and silver, of barter and belief. The rocks near your feet glisten, slick with sea mist, their surfaces catching the last golden light. Each one looks like it was kissed by the sun just a moment ago. And nearby, the hum of life moves steadily. Traders call to one another in sharp bursts, their voices weaving above the clatter of ceramic amphorae against the stone piers. There is a rhythm to it all, a market music of footsteps and shouts and splashes. The scent in the air is thick, rich with brine and oil, tinged with fig and crushed herbs. The salt lingers on your lips and stings softly at the back of your throat. A breeze rolls in from the sea and brushes your skin like a question too old to answer. It carries something ancient in its touch. Something older than language or song, and out there, beyond the noise, past the blur of sails and crates, something catches your eye. Just beyond the shimmering horizon, something moves. Not a wave, not merely a reflection of light. No, this is something more deliberate. Something alive. A shape flickers between the swells, a pale flash that seems at first to be a trick of the water. You blink, look again. It glints, briefly and then again, as if it is waiting to be noticed. A figure, perhaps. A creature, large and slow. A bull. But not just any bull, and certainly not one born of pasture or stable, for bulls do not normally move with such precision. They do not usually shine with the light of distant galaxies or carry in their breath the weight of something divine. They do not watch with eyes like polished stones, cut from lapis and dipped in starlight. Yet here, in this almost dream, this one does. This bull seems to know things it should not. Its gaze reaches not just across distance but across time. It breathes as if it remembers. As if it has always remembered, and there, not far from him, stands a girl. She is young, light of step and laughter, barefoot on the shore with her ankles deep in sand that gives way with every motion. She is radiant, not in the way of queens or warriors, but in the casual joy of someone still untouched by shadow. Her name is Europa. A name now known across lands, but here still just a daughter. She carries nothing sharp, wears no crown, and offers no resistance to the day. Her hands are filled with blossoms, and her woven basket overflows with spring. Some say she wandered in search of hyacinths. Others write that it was roses she preferred. Scholars have debated the significance of her flowers for centuries. Was it purity she gathered? Or something far more symbolic? It does not matter now. What matters is that she was there. That she was seen, because far above, from a place not bounded by earth or mortal rule, Zeus was watching, the king of the gods, so often painted with fire in his eyes and thunder at his back, did not arrive in wrath. There was no darkening of the skies. No lightning torn across the clouds. No roar to announce him. This time, there would be no conquest. Only curiosity. Only quiet longing shaped into charm. No spectacle, only strategy. No force, only form. Zeus chose not to descend in divine glory but to slip into the world through transformation. He became a bull, but not one that snorts or stamps. This bull shimmered with the soft sheen of moonlit snow. His horns curled gently, crescent-shaped, like a reflection of the night sky itself. His body was a tapestry of silver and pearl, smooth as marble and gentle as wind over water. The weight of his presence was strange but soothing, like a god who remembered tenderness. His eyes, calm and glowing, offered no threat, only mystery. Europa did not run. She did not cry out or hide. Instead, she turned toward him, drawn by something she did not understand. He approached her slowly, lowering his head with the softness of an invitation. When he nudged her shoulder, she laughed aloud. It was the kind of laugh that comes when surprise meets delight. She reached out, touched him, and found not horn or hide, but something dreamlike. Petting him felt like brushing fingertips across a cloud's edge or the skin of a half-remembered dream. His warmth settled through her hands. His presence steadied the air. When he knelt beside her, folding his legs like an offering, she did not hesitate. She stepped forward and climbed onto his back. And that was when the world changed. The moment she settled into place, something invisible shifted. The bull rose, not with lumbering weight, but with fluid certainty. His body moved like a river finding its course. Without pause, without fear, he turned his eyes toward the sea and began to move. And the sea, in answer, opened. There was no resistance. No crash of wave. The water did not swallow them. Instead, it received them. The ocean spread beneath him like silk laid out for a king. He ran across it, not through it. The sea held him aloft as if it knew what he carried. Europa clung to him, her fingers buried in the folds of his gleaming fur. At first she laughed, but the laughter soon dissolved into something quieter. Not fear, not yet. But awe. Breathless wonder. Around them, dolphins leapt in rhythm, arching through the waves like dancers summoned to perform. The sky above stretched open, more endless than ever before. Her hair streamed behind her in wet ribbons, her eyes wide with disbelief. The wind wrapped around her, heavy with salt and possibility, and still, they did not stop. Across the sea, past the points on maps and the names of nations, they traveled. Until finally, an island came into view. Crete. A place where myths would soon be born. As they touched the shore, the bull stilled. And then, without sound or flash, he became something else, no longer beast. No longer hidden, Zeus stood before her. He did not need thunder. His presence alone was enough. He was tall, cloaked in quiet power. His eyes still held the lapis flame. His smile carried a weight beyond charm. He welcomed her not as a captive, but as a queen. He built her a home, vast and pale, draped in marble and veined with shadow. He gave her more than walls. He gave her legacy, he gave her children. Among them was Minos, whose future would echo in labyrinths and legend. A lineage of kings and riddles, rooted in a single moment beside the sea. A moment when a girl stepped onto the back of a bull, and everything changed, but she never went back. There is no record of a return to her father's palace. No tale of reunions. No scroll that speaks of farewells. Her name, however, endured. It stretched, across time and tongue, until it belonged not to a girl, but to a continent. Europa became Europe. Her feet once danced on sand, and now her name rests on maps and nations. But the girl herself? She was folded back into story. Into myth. What lingers is the memory. The sound of her laughter. The feel of fur beneath her palms. The quiet ache of a god's longing masked in softness. There are other versions, of course. Stories whispered in old tongues and painted on clay. Some say Zeus took to the sea because Hermes refused to lend his wings that day. Others say Europa wanted to go. That she saw the shimmer in the bull's eye and chose it anyway. The images never agree. On some vases she grins, carefree, arms wide in flight. On others, she clutches tight, eyes wide with alarm. Was it love? Was it theft disguised in beauty? No one knows for sure, but this remains true. Europa did not vanish. She became a symbol. A thread between lands. A name whispered by both east and west. And the bull, that gleaming shape of divine disguise, now lives in the sky. The constellation Taurus, still staring out across the stars, still watching the waves he once crossed, and you? You are still here, still watching. You see the sea where Europa vanished. You hear the water, soft against the rocks. The wind has quieted. The sky has deepened. The world tilts gently into sleep. You blink once. Then again. The shimmer fades, and something new begins to form. Another girl. Another shape. A goddess cloaked in jealousy, waiting quietly just beyond the veil of night, because in these stories, it never ends with just one. You can still hear it, that faint, nearly imperceptible splash of hooves meeting open water. Not close enough to startle, not loud enough to call attention, but they're all the same. It lingers like the aftertaste of a dream you did not quite finish. Somewhere in the soft caverns of your ears, the Mediterranean carries that sound like a secret, circling back and forth like a lullaby that refuses to be forgotten. It is not just a memory. It is a residue. It curls inside your chest, like mist that has taken root, delicate and unshakable. You do not walk. You do not step. You simply float. Your body, untethered from thought, slips forward. The image of Europa fades behind you like a page turned too slowly. And now you move deeper. Into the fog. A fog that gathers in coils, thickening with each slow, rhythmic heartbeat. This is not the kind of fog that comes from sea temperature or wind shift. This is not ordinary weather. This is a veil. A threshold. A soft, unmarked curtain drawn between the remembered and the rewritten. Between what was, and what now exists only in retelling. Here, reality does not disappear. It recedes. It loosens its grip and allows something stranger to take hold. In this place, fable breathes beside nightmare. History, legend, and metaphor begin to overlap until you no longer know which came first, and as the fog curls tighter around you, blurring the world like a painter's smudge. Another shape steps forward. This time, it is a different girl. She is not dancing. She is not laughing. There are no petals in her hands. There is no ocean breeze in her hair. She stands alone, her figure small against the looming shape of Mount Mycale. The mountain rises behind her like a silent witness, hunched and brooding, its outline jagged as if carved from some darker thought. Its presence presses against the horizon like a beast crouched in waiting, offering neither shelter nor protection. Just wait. Just the sense that something is always watching. She is breathing hard. Not from exertion, but from something more internal. Her chest rises and falls as though she cannot find the rhythm. Her hands shake. They curl inward, clawing lightly at her own ribs, as though trying to hold in the storm growing beneath her skin. Her eyes are wide, too wide, stretched beyond comfort, glinting with wet confusion. And she is staring. Not outward, but downward. into the shallow surface of a pond. A pond that should be quiet and familiar, a place to reflect and breathe. But what she sees reflected back at her is not comfort. It is not even a distortion, it is a stranger, and not a metaphorical one. The girl in the pond's surface no longer wears the face she once recognized. What blinks back at her is not a poetic symbol or an artist's indulgence. It is a cow. A literal one. Muzzle narrow. Eyes uncomfortably large. Ears that flick and twitch with disobedient instinct. She blinks. The image does not. Her heart hammers, but the reflection stays steady. There is no dream logic here. No comforting glitch. Just the truth of what she has become. Her name is Io, and the horror that curls in her throat is not because she has imagined this fate, but because she now wears it. Because she knows it is real. Because the mirror tells her what her hands can no longer feel. She remembers the temple. The marble. The prayers. She remembers who she was. A priestess. Not a flirt. Not a siren. A servant of Hera. A woman who chose devotion over desire. Intelligence over impulse. She had faith. She had clarity. And she had beauty, which in these stories, as you likely know by now, is not a blessing but a trigger. It is not a thing that grants joy. It is a flare lit in the darkness, drawing attention that never ends. Well, Zeus saw her, of course he did. He watched her move through the colonnades, her steps careful and grounded, her eyes fixed not on him but on something higher. She belonged to no one. Not in body. Not in intention. She belonged to prayer. And that, to Zeus, was the most enticing defiance of all. He did not ask. He did not wait. He did not wonder. He simply wanted. And once he wanted, the wanting filled him completely. It was not love. It was not curiosity. It was possession. And he intended to take her, but Io was not blind. She felt it. That prickling sense of danger, cloaked in charm. She heard it in the too quiet hush that followed her footsteps. She saw it in the golden places of the temple where shadows lingered without cause. She tried to avoid it. She moved with more caution. She sidestepped the sunlit arches where presence felt too thick. And above all, she held to her vows. To Hera. The goddess she served. The queen whose fury was legend, whose instincts were sharper than flame, whose throne had withstood centuries of betrayal. Still, it did not matter. Zeus did what he always did when patience failed him. He lied. The myths differ in their staging. Some say he wrapped the earth in a divine darkness, thick and stifling, a fog that suffocated color and swallowed sound. Others claim he reshaped himself into a cloud, immense and silver-edged, billowing down from the sky like a storm with a secret. Either way, the result was the same. A veil fell over the temple. Over her, she must have known something was wrong. You can almost see her, standing still, eyes narrowed, trying to understand why the air had turned too quiet, why the wind no longer moved. She might have tilted her face upward, frowned, and whispered something beneath her breath. Maybe even a prayer to Hera, too late, but Hera was already coming, she always knew. She always came. And Zeus, panicked by her approach, reacted. He snapped his magic like a whip. He did not run. He did not plead. He simply changed the girl. In the time it takes to blink, Io was no longer Io. The transformation stole everything. Her voice. Her face. Her body. The girl who once wove garlands now stood on hooves. Her prayers turned to bellows. Her breath came short and uneven. Her thoughts were her own, but her body no longer obeyed, and then Hera arrived, the fog parted just enough for her to be seen. She walked with the unhurried grace of someone who already knows what has happened. She looked down at the creature before her, trembling and silent, and smiled with a precision colder than frost. "What a beautiful heifer," she said. Not a question. A declaration. She did not wait for permission. She did not blink. Her voice dripped with false sweetness, but her eyes burned with awareness. She took Io as her own. As a prize. As a punishment. She pretended not to notice the way the cow's breath hitched or the way her legs refused to move. She acted as though she believed it was simply an animal. A curious, frightened, lovely thing. But she knew. She always knew, and she made sure Io was never alone. Hera assigned her a guardian. Not a shepherd. Not a caretaker. A warden. Argus Panoptes. The one with 100 eyes. Each orb gleaming, each pupil restless. No two of those eyes ever closed at once. When some slept, others opened. And when those rested, the rest awakened. There was no escape. No moment unwatched. No time to grieve or hide or rest. Io wandered the fields, a prisoner with no cell, her only cage the eyes that never blinked together. She grazed, but tasted nothing. She walked, but went nowhere. She tried to scream, but only low, sorrowful moos escaped her throat. Inside her mind, she was still herself, but outside, she had been erased. Eventually, Zeus tired of the arrangement. Perhaps he felt guilt. Perhaps he feared being outmaneuvered. Perhaps it was just another impulse. Regardless, he sent Hermes. Not with thunder. Not with war. But with music, Hermes, the trickster. The storyteller. The god of boundaries and crossing them. He arrived with a set of pipes and a voice like warm honey. He sat before Argus and played. And spoke. And played again. Tales unfolded like vines, slow and mesmerizing. Songs rose like fog. Argus listened. His eyes began to flicker. One closed. Then another. Then another. And finally, all of them. That was the moment, Hermes acted. Quick. Quiet. Merciless. He severed the giant's head. It rolled once, and then was still, and Hera, in her own cold brand of mourning, took those 100 eyes and scattered them across the tail of her favorite bird. The peacock. And that display, brilliant and iridescent, became a monument. A reminder. A warning. Io was free of Argus, but she was not free of suffering. Hera, humiliated and furious, unleashed a new torment. A gadfly. Small. Persistent. Divine. It bit and buzzed and chased. It drove Io across the known world. Her hooves struck earth in lands with names still unformed. She crossed rivers. She slipped through valleys. She stampeded across a narrow strait that would later bear her mark. The Bosporus. The passage of the cow. Her agony became geography, and when she finally reached Egypt, her body shaking with exhaustion, her mouth foaming with strain, her eyes hollow from endless flight, Zeus met her again. This time, he touched her gently. He spoke softly. And with that touch, the spell unraveled. Her body reformed. Her voice returned, but the girl had vanished. In her place stood a woman remade. She bore a son, Epiphus, whose descendants would leave great shadows across time. Temples would rise in his name. Cities would carry echoes of her flight. Io would be remembered not as victim, but as goddess. In Egypt, they called her Isis. They cloaked her in reverence. They wrapped her story in gold and worshipped the shape she had once been forced to wear. Did she ever say her real name again? We cannot know. Some say it was all a symbol. That the stories blurred and twisted until two names became one. That the myth was remolded to fit a need. That the truth was forgotten, and only the shape remained. But the sadness persists. It wraps around her tale like the first mist that began it. It clings. It hums. It never quite fades. Being chosen by Zeus was not a blessing, it was a disappearance. Even the gadfly, tiny and endless, became legend. It endures in metaphor. As guilt. As pain. As something that cannot be shaken. It is the buzzing thought that chases you in quiet rooms. The sharp sting of memory that never truly fades. It is a wound with wings, and now, as night presses deeper into your room, you feel her near, not the girl she once was, but the ghost of her form. The ache she carried. The hooves that pressed the soil. The breath that still fogs the air. She walks. Not because she wants to, but because she cannot stop. Her journey became her being. One step. Then another. Each one echoing in silence. Above you, stars blink coldly, the fog around your bed begins to shift, mountains soften. Winds turn, somewhere else, another girl is waiting. She stands on the edge of something. She does not know it yet. But a god has already seen her. A goddess is already watching, because in these stories, it always continues. The ground is soft beneath your feet now, mossy, damp, and strangely silent. You've left the scorching trails of Io's endless march and stepped into the cool hush of an Arcadian glade. Shadows stretch beneath the pines. The air smells of bark and broken dreams. Somewhere in the distance, an owl blinks awake. And you're watching a bear, but not just any bear. This one doesn't belong in the forest. Not really. Her eyes are too human. Her stance too confused. Her paws tremble as she tries to remember how fingers worked. She's trapped in fur and fawn, but her mind is still her own. You know her name before she even speaks, though, of course, she can't. Callisto, a follower of Artemis. A sworn virgin. A hunter who once stalked these woods with a bow and a laugh and not a care in the world. Until Zeus, ever the opportunist, noticed her. The thing about Callisto is that she wasn't just beautiful. She was devoted. And that's what made her appealing to a god who apparently couldn't resist boundaries. Zeus, aware of her loyalty to Artemis, disguised himself as, Artemis herself. Let that sink in for a moment. A god pretending to be a goddess just to approach a girl who never wanted gods near her in the first place. The deception was intricate, the betrayal almost surgical. What happened next varies depending on which scroll you ask. Some say Zeus seduced her gently. Others say the encounter was far more cruel. Either way, the result was the same. Callisto became pregnant. And she tried to hide it, of course. Wore looser tunics. Hunted in silence. But nothing stays hidden long in the world of myths, Artemis noticed. Or maybe Hera did first. When Callisto's belly swelled, she was cast out. From Artemis's circle. From the only life she'd known. Her bow was taken from her. Her name whispered in contempt. That's the thing about Greek mythology, victims get punished while gods write the narrative, and then came the transformation. Some say it was Artemis. Furious and betrayed, who turned her into a bear. Others say it was Hera, yet again wielding divine spike like a hairstylist with too many scissors. Historians still argue whether the punishment was symbolic of wild womanhood or just ancient Greece being aggressively unsubtle. Either way, Callisto woke up one morning with pause. She ran. She hid. She raised her son, Arcus, in secret. Yes, she gave birth as a bear, because apparently the horror never ends. Arcus grew up human, hunting in the same woods where his mother once played. Until, one day, they crossed paths. Imagine the silence of that moment. A boy lifts his bow. A bear watches with maternal fear. And the air between them holds 1,000 unsaid words. No one knows what would have happened if Zeus hadn't intervened. But before the arrow flew, the sky opened. Zeus, ever the belated problem solver, scooped them both up into the heavens. You can still see them there, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. The great bear and the little bear. Eternal silhouettes against the night, but even in the stars, Hera had her say. Furious that her rival had been honored with a place in the sky, she begged Oceanus and Tethys, primordial sea gods, to never let the bears dip below the horizon. And so, in ancient astronomy, the great bear never sets. Always visible. Always circling. A cosmic scar that never fades. Here's your quirky tidbit. Early astronomers believed that seeing Ursa Major high in the sky meant you were favored by the gods, while others thought it was an omen of restless longing. That the bear was still searching, for her old body, her lost voice, her stolen life. You glance upward now, into the imaginary sky above your bed, and you can almost see her. Still watching. Still silent. Still glowing faintly with injustice. And in that silence, something shifts again. The forest blurs. The starlight dims. You're no longer in Arcadia, you're in a stone tower now. A narrow shaft of sunlight cuts across the floor. And inside, a girl sits alone, unaware that her next visitor will arrive as gold. Actual gold. The air is heavy here. Still. Thick with the scent of polished stone and something older, like dust trapped in ancient hopes. You're standing in a chamber with no door, no exit, only high walls slick with cold and time. A single beam of light spills down through a hole in the ceiling. It glints against bronze fittings. It casts long shadows across a lonely girl's face. Her name is Danaë, and she is locked inside a tower because of a prophecy. That's how her story begins, not with a kiss or a flower, but with fear. Her father, King Acrisius of Argos, once consulted the oracle of Delphi. The message he received: "One day, your grandson will kill you." Classic Greek miscommunication. Naturally, his solution wasn't therapy, or humility, or rethinking the whole fate thing, no. He decided to prevent Danaë from ever getting pregnant, and how do you do that in mythology? You build a tower with no doors. She wasn't just grounded. She was entombed in luxury, polished walls. Food lowered in baskets. A life designed to be untouched. But remember, Zeus loves a challenge. And Danaë's tower? It wasn't fortress enough for a god with questionable boundaries and a flair for the dramatic. So one day, as Danaë sat beneath the skylight, sunlight shifted. It danced differently. And then, it poured in, golden, liquid, alive. Not metaphorically. Literally. A shower of gold streamed down from the heavens and enveloped her. Cloaked her. Sank into her skin like warmth and thunder disguised as seduction. Zeus had taken a new form. Not a bull. Not a swan. Gold. Historians still argue whether this was a metaphor for divine radiance or an artistic way to avoid writing awkward scenes. Either way, Danaë conceived a child from that shimmering downpour. She named him Perseus, yes, that Perseus. The one who would one day slice off Medusa's head, ride Pegasus, and accidentally fulfill the very prophecy Acrisius tried to escape. But before the glory came the fear. When Acrisius discovered his daughter with a baby, he panicked. Again. And in true Greek overreaction, he stuffed Danaë and infant Perseus into a wooden chest and hurled them into the sea. You know, just a classic grandpa move. The chest floated. Bobbed. Didn't sink. Maybe because of divine protection. Maybe because plot armor was strong that day. Either way, they washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman named Dictys took them in. He raised Perseus. gave Danaë shelter. For a while, it was almost quiet. Almost, because the king of Seriphos, Polydectes, wanted Danaë. And when she refused him, on account of trauma, taste, and her son being a literal demigod, he plotted to get rid of Perseus. Hence the whole bring me the head of Medusa quest. You know how that ended. Perseus came back victorious, holding the head like a lunchbox, and eventually, fate did its thing. Years later, during some ancient sporting event, a discus throw gone rogue, Perseus accidentally struck an old man in the crowd. That man? King Acrisius, prophecy fulfilled. Oops, here's your quirky fringe fact. Some variations say Danaë's tower wasn't a tower at all, but an underground bronze chamber. A sort of reverse prison, where sunlight itself had to bend and crawl in just to find her. Others suggest Zeus took the form of a dream that sank into her mind while she slept, an ancient hint that myth was always wrestling with consent before it even had the language. And Danaë? She disappears from the spotlight not long after. Once Perseus ascends, her story fades into the haze. Some say she returned to Argos. Others claim she was buried beside Dictys, the fisherman who offered her a life without gold, gods, or towers. You look up again at the imagined skylight above your bed. The light feels warmer now. Softer. No golden showers from the heavens, just a quiet flicker of the moon, but in the hush, another name whispers through the dark. Another lover. Another trick. Another wish that should never have been granted, because next comes Semele. And she's about to ask for something that no mortal was meant to see. The walls are flickering now, not with torches, but with firelight that hasn't caught yet, heat that hasn't turned to flame. You feel it more than see it. Like a hush before thunder. A pressure behind your eyes, warning of something immense approaching. And in the center of this almost burning world stands Semele, draped in twilight, unaware she's holding a god's fate in her mouth. Semele, princess of Thebes, mortal. Beautiful. Mortal, and unlike some of the others, she didn't meet Zeus by mistake or deceit. He came to her openly, disguised only as a man with gentle words and eyes that glittered a little too brightly. They met. They talked. They loved, if loving a king of Olympus can ever be called that. Semele became pregnant. A spark had taken root inside her, growing slowly into a god. But in this myth, the tragedy doesn't come from Zeus's disguise. It comes from what happens when it falls away, because Hera was watching. Of course, ever the master of vengeance by proxy, Hera didn't strike Semele down outright. She chose a subtler weapon, doubt. Disguising herself as an old nursemaid, she visited Semele one afternoon, all wrinkles and whispers. "Are you sure," she asked, voice sticky with pretend concern, "that your lover is really who he says he is? Men do love their stories." Semele hesitated. Doubt took root. So the next time Zeus came, Semele smiled, touched his cheek, and said, "I want to see you as you truly are." Zeus paled. Not with fear, gods don't fear, but with something worse, inevitability. He'd sworn to grant her any wish. And now she had asked for the one thing no mortal should ever request. To see a god in his divine form is not like watching someone take off a mask. It's like staring directly into a supernova made of ego, lightning, and eternal truth. There's no adjustment. No turning back. He begged her to change her mind. She refused, so he did it. Zeus revealed himself, flashing thunder, cosmic fire, the unbearable fullness of godhood. The chamber ignited. Semele. Poor brave Semele, disintegrated in an instant. Not burned. Unmade. Like a candle under a sunbeam. But here's the twist, her unborn child didn't die. Zeus, in an act equal parts desperation and divine panic, snatched the baby from her charred body and sewed it into his own thigh. Yep. His thigh, and there the child gestated until full term, when Zeus cut open his leg and delivered him into the world. That child? Dionysus. The god of wine, madness, theater, and all things delightfully unstable, historians still argue whether this strange birth story was a metaphor for divine duality or just another bizarre footnote in mythology's chaotic scrapbook. Either way, Dionysus would always be known as the twice-born. Semele, meanwhile, drifted into myth. Some versions say Dionysus, once grown, descended into the underworld to retrieve her, lifting her from death and naming her Thy One, a minor goddess among the stars, but for a long time, she was only a memory. A spark. A cautionary tale whispered in marble hallways: never ask a god to show you his truth. You might not survive it, and here's a weird little tidbit: some ancient temples claimed that Semele's ashes still smoldered beneath their altars, providing the divine heat needed for prophecy. Which, if true, would make her not only a mother of gods, but a literal fuel for visions. You shift slightly, your blanket suddenly feeling heavier, like a weight you didn't notice before. The fire in your mind dims, cooling to embers. But the scent of ash and ambrosia still clings faintly to the dream around you, and as the smoke clears, it's not a woman you see next. It's a bird, a swan, gliding gracefully across a glassy lake. Don't trust it, because this time, Zeus is feathers and beak, and Leda doesn't stand a chance. The lake is so still you can see the sky inside it, clouds drifting through water, stars shimmering just beneath the surface. There's no wind here, only the occasional ripple from a fish that probably regrets moving. Trees lean inward around the edges, watching. And in the middle of all that silence stands Leda, barefoot at the shore, unaware that the world is about to bend toward the absurd, because here comes a swan that is not a swan with eyes too knowing, wings too wide, and a presence that radiates, well, let's call it ominous majesty. This is Zeus again, because of course it is. The king of gods has tried bulls, clouds, golden rain, and now feathers. The disguise game continues, and this one's arguably the weirdest. Why a swan? Historians still argue whether the swan symbolized grace, deception, or just a really confusing art trend. Leda, queen of Sparta, is walking alone. Some say she's out to bathe. Others suggest she's praying, perhaps even just enjoying the peace. Either way, she sees the swan struggling, its wings flapping violently, as if fleeing something. And Leda, compassionate, approaches. You probably know where this is going. What happens next depends entirely on the version of the myth you read, and there are a lot of versions. Some say the swan flies into her arms, trembling, and rests there before the seduction. Others are less kind, describing a divine assault dressed in feathers and confusion. Either way, the event is not romantic. It is strange, quietly horrific, and mythologically pivotal. That night, Leda also sleeps with her husband, King Tyndareus. And here's where things go full soap opera. She lays 2 eggs, yes. Eggs, because when you mix divine swan biology with human royalty, apparently you get poultry-style reproduction. From those eggs hatch 4 children. 2 are mortal, 2 are divine. 2 are girls, 2 are boys. The pairings vary depending on who's telling the tale, but the usual arrangement goes like this: Helen and Pollux are children of Zeus. Clytemnestra and Castor are children of Tyndareus, yes, that Helen. The face that launched 1,000 ships. And that Clytemnestra, who later becomes a queen and a murderer, depending on which sequel you watch. So now Leda, who didn't ask for any of this, has given birth to a quartet of destiny, children whose stories will ripple through Homer, tragedy, and Greek dinner parties for centuries. Her name becomes a footnote. Her story reduced to that one weird swan encounter. Here's your quirky historical nugget: in ancient Greek art, Leda and the swan were an extremely popular motif. So popular, in fact, that the Romans later copied it endlessly. There's even a version attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, yes, the Renaissance guy, with delicate sketches of the moment frozen forever in marble and oil. But did you know? Early Christian scholars tried to reinterpret Leda's myth as an allegory for the soul's union with divinity. Which is one way to spin it, and still, the discomfort lingers, because even wrapped in allegory, the core remains, another woman transformed, confused, manipulated by a god with too many disguises and too few boundaries. What happened to Leda after? She fades. Like the soft curve of a feather falling out of frame. Some say she lived quietly, watching her children spiral toward legend and ruin. Others say she died of shame, or heartbreak, or exhaustion, but her children, oh, they didn't fade. Helen would ignite a war. Castor and Pollux would become stars, literally, the constellation Gemini. Clytemnestra would marry Agamemnon and later. Well, let's just say knives were involved. You sit now by the lake, just like Leda once did, watching reflections warp in the water. You wonder what it feels like to hatch destiny from eggs. Or to look into the eyes of a swan and see a storm, the wind picks up, you turn, and there, across the horizon of myth, another woman waits. The night has stretched unnaturally long, because Zeus has made it so. Just to be with her, her name is Alcmene. And she is about to birth a legend. The night is long. Longer than it should be. Longer than any other night in history. You step into it as if wading into thick velvet, the stars above you suspended like glitter caught in molasses. Time slows, stretches, and forgets itself. And in the middle of it all, lit by a flickering oil lamp and the pain of labor, is Alcmene. This is no ordinary birth, because the child coming into the world tonight is Heracles, and Zeus, as always, is far too involved. Alcmene is the wife of Amphitryon, a noble man of Thebes. She's faithful, kind, and weary, having just lost her brothers in war, she's vowed not to share her bed with her husband until he avenges them. Amphitryon rides off to complete that grim mission. So naturally, Zeus sees a window, and slides right through it, while Amphitryon is away, Zeus disguises himself as Amphitryon. He mimics his face, his voice, even his scent. He tells Alcmene that the war is over, the vengeance complete. That they can finally be together again. And Alcmene, believing it's her husband, welcomes him, that night. Zeus makes it last 3 times as long. A single, eternal stretch of darkness, held in place so he can savor his deception. It's one of the cruelest tricks in the canon. When the real Amphitryon returns the next day and starts telling the same victory story, Alcmene freezes. Her confusion is immediate. Her horror, quiet. But there's no undoing it now. She's pregnant with twins. One child is Heracles, son of Zeus, the other is Iphicles, son of Amphitryon, twins born of 2 fathers. Only in Greek myth, Alcmene gives birth in fear. Hera, as usual, knows. She's furious. Not only did Zeus cheat again, he's sired a son who, according to another prophecy, will become a hero more powerful than anyone before him. Hera won't have that, so she hurries the birth of another woman, hoping that child will arrive first and steal Heracles' fate. But with the help of trickster deities and sympathetic midwives, Alcmene succeeds. Heracles enters the world. Still, Hera's revenge comes fast. She sends 2 snakes to kill him in his crib. But even as a baby, Heracles is stronger than fate. He strangles them both, one in each tiny fist. You'd think this would impress Hera. It doesn't. It just sets the tone for the rest of his life, 12 labors, endless trials, all seated in the jealous wrath of a goddess scorned. But tonight, we stay with Alcmene. She doesn't get 12 labors. Just one, surviving motherhood in a myth shaped entirely by someone else's desire. She didn't ask for a god. She didn't pray for fame. She just tried to live, to grieve, to rebuild. And was rewarded with eternity's most complicated baby shower. Historians still argue whether Alcmene truly loved Heracles, or if she looked at him and saw only deception made flesh. Some stories say she raised him proudly. Others suggest she kept her distance, always haunted by the memory of that never-ending night. Your quirky fact: some later versions of the myth claimed Heracles had to suckle from Hera herself as part of his divine ascension. Hera, tricked into nursing him, yanked him away in disgust, causing her milk to spray across the sky and form the Milky Way. Astronomy via awkward breastfeeding. You sit now in that too long night, feeling its weight. The kind of weight that bends clocks and stretches shadows. Around you, women sleep in uneasy silence. Alcmene breathes steadily beside her children, one divine, one mortal, both cursed by the same bed, and even now, Zeus isn't done. You close your eyes, only to open them again in a palace under siege, not from war, but from whispers. A woman flees her home, swollen with shame, and somewhere overhead, a god watches. Antiope is running. And you're about to follow her. Before you even see them, you hear the sandals. They strike the ground in staccato bursts, soles slapping against the hard-packed earth with a rhythm that speaks of desperation. Not the quiet shuffle of retreat, but the panicked pace of someone running far too long, with too much to outrun. The sound echoes down the narrow trail, bouncing between the cliffs and olive trees like a drumbeat marking the collapse of order. Her breath follows next. It tears from her throat in ragged pulls, each one catching at the edges, scraping the inside of her ribs. Her lungs burn. Her legs threaten to fold beneath her. But still, she runs. As if the mere act of stopping would shatter her. As if stillness itself might invite shame to catch up and devour her whole. Antiope is running. She runs faster than memory. Faster than reputation. Faster than the pieces of her past that claw after her like hands in the dark. You trail just behind her, not in body, but in feeling. Pulled forward by a fear that does not belong to you, yet wraps around your chest as though it were your own. Antiope, a name less echoed than Helen, less dissected than Medea, but woven through the same fabric. A princess of Thebes. Her story is stitched with betrayal and haunted by the familiar presence that threads itself through so many lives in myth. Zeus, her beginning is marked, like so many others, by beauty. That strange and double-edged mythological descriptor. A gift that is also a warning. She was beautiful. And while walking the rocky slopes of Mount Cithaeron, brushing fingers over pine branches and staring into open sky, she was seen. Zeus noticed her. Of course he did, but how he came to her, well, that depends on who you ask. Some say he took the form of a satyr, wild-eyed and braying, his limbs clumsy with animal lust and urgency. Others claim he disguised himself as a mortal man, cloaked in starlight, charming, mysterious. Perhaps it was a whisper of wind that turned her head, a flicker of shadow that made her pause. However it happened, the story ends the same. She became pregnant, and the moment her body began to change, the world around her shifted. Her father, King Nycteus, erupted with fury. Not the kind that seeks understanding, but the kind that masks fear with outrage. He declared her a disgrace. Claimed she had dishonored the royal blood of Thebes, dragged their name through dust. He saw not the daughter who had been deceived, but a problem to be erased. His grief grew monstrous. Some say he took his own life. Others insist he died of heartbreak. No one agrees on how, only that he vanished, leaving behind a legacy of condemnation. In his place came Lycus, Nycteus' brother. A man who inherited both the throne and the rage. If Nycteus had blamed Antiope, Lycus made it a mission. He became her pursuer. Her judge. Her hunter, so she fled. She crossed valleys and rivers, seeking refuge. She arrived in Sicyon, where she found brief protection in the arms of King Hippopius. He married her. Gave her a place to breathe. For a moment, the world softened. She could pretend, just for a little while, that the gods were distant. And that safety was possible, but Lycus was relentless. He found her. He seized her. He tore her from the arms of her new husband and began the long march back to Thebes. Bound. shamed. Dragged through a landscape that now blurred with sorrow and exhaustion, and somewhere along that road, while the dirt clung to her feet and the whispers of strangers scraped across her skin, she gave birth, twins, Zeus and Amphion, born not in a palace. Not in warmth. But on the cold, cracked back of the earth. Her wrists still bound. Her future still uncertain. She left them there, not because she wished them harm, but because she believed it was the only way to save them. Some say she was forced to abandon them. Others say she looked up at the sky and begged the gods to intervene. Perhaps she hoped nature would cradle what she could not. Whatever the reason, the twins were left on the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, their cries rising like smoke into the morning light. Miraculously, they were found. Shepherds took them in, unaware of their birthright. They grew strong. Grew fierce. Grew without knowledge of the mother who had bled for them on the roadside. Meanwhile, back in Thebes, the cruelty deepened. Lycus's wife, Dirce, became Antiope's tormentor. Her hatred was sharpened by jealousy and stoked by cruelty. Every day, Antiope was humiliated. Her clothes torn. Her name spat like a curse. She became less than a servant. Less than a person. Time passed. Her face changed. Her strength dwindled. And still, the abuse continued. No one lifted a hand to stop it, until one day, she escaped, old. Ragged. Starving. She wandered back into the wilderness that once swallowed her children. She stumbled through thorn and stone, unsure if her feet could carry her one step farther, and somehow, they led her to them, Zeus and Amphion, now men. Now tall, strong, unshaken. At first, they did not know her. How could they? She was broken in ways the world had not taught them to see. But she spoke. And slowly, the shape of her sorrow aligned with the pieces of their past. And when the truth became clear, the rage that rose in them cracked the sky. They marched to Thebes, they took hold of justice. Dirce was seized. The woman who had lashed their mother now faced the fury she had cultivated. They did not kill her with sword or poison. They bound her to a bull. A wild, foaming creature. Its horns curved like fate itself. She was dragged, through streets that once echoed with her laughter, through the dust she once made others crawl through. Until there was nothing left but silence, Zeus and Amphion became kings. They built the walls of Thebes. Not with sweat and tools, but with magic. Amphion's lyre sang, and the stones rose to meet the music. The city lifted itself around them. A kingdom formed by melody and vengeance, and Antiope, her story fades. She does not die in fire or glory. She does not rise to godhood. In some tellings, the weight of her suffering fractures her mind. In others, she retreats to the countryside, vanishing into quiet fields, content to be forgotten by history, but not by everyone. In the lost plays of Euripides, she is given voice. She stands. Not as a broken woman, but as a survivor. Her story, reclaimed. Her pain, given shape. She becomes more than footnote. She becomes truth. This is rare. Myth does not often allow women to stand again, but for one moment, tonight, she does, long enough to breathe. Long enough to be seen, and then, once more, the world shifts, the wind changes. The ground beneath your feet dissolves, mountains flatten into horizon, trees shrink to silence, and a shoreline rises in their place, pale sand. Quiet waves. And a figure seated at the edge of it all, another woman. Her name is Aegina. She has been stolen from her homeland, left on an island that now bears her name, and just beyond the waves, the god who cannot stop remaking the world waits once again. Zeus is never far behind. The sand is warm here, soft as sifted flour, fine as crushed seashells. You walk along the shoreline of an island that didn't used to exist. There's no harbor, no city, no footsteps but your own. Just sea and silence, and a woman sitting alone, hugging her knees as the tide murmurs secrets only the exiled understand. Her name is Aegina, and she is the beginning and end of this place. She was born in Thessaly, daughter of the river goddess Olympus, a nymph, yes, but one who glowed with mortal emotion. She wasn't a goddess, just close enough to invite trouble. And trouble, as usual, arrived in the shape of Zeus. You know the pattern by now. He saw her, wanted her, and so he took her. Some say he transformed into an eagle, swooping down with feathers flashing like knives and talons curled in longing. Others say he came in a chariot, or a cloud, or simply as himself, because at this point, Zeus was getting a little lazy with the disguises. Either way, Aegina vanished. Olympus searched for her. He wandered the coasts, asked the wind, the trees, even the hills. When he finally tracked her to a distant island in the middle of nowhere, he confronted Zeus. And for his trouble, he got a bolt of lightning hurled at his head. Classic negotiation strategy, so Aegina stayed on that island. Alone. At first, it had no name. No people. Just her. Zeus renamed it in her honor. Aegina, and made it her prison and her kingdom all at once. He left her pregnant. Because of course he did. Her son would be named Heracles, and he'd grow up to become a famous king, one of the three judges of the underworld, alongside Minos and Rhadamanthus. But before that glory came sorrow, because Hera had been watching, again. And her revenge wasn't subtle this time. She didn't send gadflies or snakes or ironic birds. She sent a plague. A sweeping sickness that devoured the new island's inhabitants. Some say there were only a few dozen settlers by then, others insist Aegina had begun building a whole city. It didn't matter. They died, everyone, except Aegina and her son. Heartbroken by the silence, Heracles prayed to Zeus to repopulate the island. In response, Zeus transformed the island's ants into people. Yes, ants. The Myrmidons. A race of tireless, loyal warriors who would one day serve Achilles in the Trojan War. So Aegina, the lonely mother, became the matriarch of a nation built on pain and divine pest control. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some versions claim that the Myrmidons retained ant-like traits: quiet, efficient, unemotional. In fact, the name Myrmidon has since come to mean a blindly obedient follower. Which feels a little unkind to ants. Honestly, historians still argue whether the island of Aegina was mythically intended to reflect themes of rebirth through tragedy, or if it was just a creative excuse to explain population booms in an era without spreadsheets. And Aegina herself, she disappears from the stage. Her son becomes a king. Her name becomes a flag. The island, a strategic center in Greek history, home to temples and trade routes and wars. But the woman who sat on that beach, knees to her chest, staring at the sea that took everything, she's gone. No statue, no hymn, just a whisper in the wind that sometimes sounds like her name. You walk further now, past the shoreline, into a mist that smells like ink and candle smoke. And somewhere in that haze sits another woman, but she's not a victim. Not quite, she's a goddess. She knows what's coming. And still, she chooses it. Mnemosyne, the personification of memory. And for 9 nights, she will lie with Zeus to give birth not to warriors or kings, but to inspiration itself. The fog that curls around your feet now is thicker, gentler, like incense in a library, or the kind of dream that smells faintly of old books and wet stone. There are no screams here, no chains or fire or feathers. Just silence. Not empty silence, but full, echoing with unwritten poetry, unfinished paintings, songs not yet sung. You're somewhere outside of time, and at the center of this stillness sits Mnemosyne, Titaness of memory. Mother of the Muses, and for once, Zeus doesn't take. He asks. It's strange to think of him asking. But the myths insist, for Mnemosyne, Zeus came not as a bull or a swan or a spark. He came in his own shape, solemn, regal, curious. The war with the Titans had ended. The Olympians had won. Power had shifted. But Mnemosyne remained, an older force, wiser, untouched by the petty squabbles of Olympus. Zeus, perhaps tired of conquest and trickery, approached her not as a god with thunder, but as a god with questions, and for 9 nights, he lay with her, 9 nights. One for each muse. Their union wasn't a whirlwind. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, ritual, even. Each night a quiet seed was planted, and in time, each seed would bloom into a daughter. 9 goddesses of inspiration, Calliope, Clio, Euterpe, Erato, Melpomene, Polyhymnia, Terpsichore, Talia, and Urania. The muses of epic poetry, history, music, love poetry, tragedy, sacred hymns. Dance, comedy, and astronomy. From love, or perhaps simply from understanding, came art. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the ancient Greeks believed that all acts of creativity were channeled through the muses. No artist created alone. They were vessels. Mouthpieces. You didn't write a poem, you received it. You didn't compose music, you remembered it, whispered back by one of Mnemosyne's daughters. And Mnemosyne herself? She faded back into the mist, content. She asked for nothing. No temples. No altars. Just memory. Here's your quirky tidbit: in some ancient mystery religions, the sky above you now is dazzling, so high, so clear, it feels unreal. Too crisp. Too polished. Like the heavens were scrubbed for company. You stand at the edge of Mount Ida, the clouds a soft sea below. And beside you is a boy. Youthful. Radiant. With a face carved straight from the ideal. This is Ganymede, a prince of Troy. A shepherd. A mortal, and in a moment, he'll no longer be any of those things, he's tending sheep. That's how the story usually begins. Ganymede, the most beautiful of boys, is out in the fields, watching over flocks that nibble at thyme-scented grass. He's humming, or maybe laughing. He's happy, or at least content, and then, a shadow falls over him. Look up, there, swooping out of the blinding sun, is an eagle. Not a normal one. Its wingspan could darken a battlefield. Its eyes glitter with purpose. And before Ganymede can move, it seizes him in its talons and lifts him into the sky. You already know who the eagle is, Zeus again, no disguises this time. Just raw divine force wrapped in feathers. Zeus carries Ganymede to Olympus, ignoring Troy's screams, ignoring the boy's flailing limbs, ignoring everything except the beauty he refuses to let remain mortal. In Olympus, Ganymede is welcomed, but not as a hero, not as a guest. He is made cupbearer. The divine bartender. Pourer of ambrosia. Eternal servant at an eternal banquet. He never goes home. Here's your mainstream historical fact: Ganymede became a symbol of idealized male youth in ancient Greek art and literature. The relationship between Zeus and Ganymede, often interpreted as romantic or even erotic, was cited by philosophers as the celestial model of pederastic love, which in many Greek city-states was normalized, stylized, even glorified. Here's your quirky tidbit: the name Ganymede literally means joy of the genitals. So, subtlety was not a strong suit for ancient linguists. Historians still argue whether the myth of Ganymede was meant to endorse a certain kind of societal relationship, or whether it was simply another tale of divine possession disguised as beauty worship. But here's what the myth never shows: what Ganymede wanted. There's no version where the boy speaks his mind. No scene where he pleads to go back to Troy, or asks why he was chosen. He becomes a permanent fixture in the gods' dining room, forever young, forever polite, pouring wine for immortals who already feel a little too full of themselves. To soften the story, later writers gave him a gift. Zeus places his image in the stars as the constellation Aquarius, the water-bearer. A cosmic tribute. A memory disguised as honor, but even in the night sky, Ganymede is pouring, still serving, still looking down, and the story lingers in your thoughts longer than you expected. Not because it's the loudest or the flashiest, but because of its quiet. The silence that follows an abduction no one calls by name. You feel the breeze shift again, the stars blur. The air turns pine dark and cool, and far away, on the slopes of another mountain, 7 sisters climb the hills together, laughing, running, hiding from something they cannot name. One of them stumbles. Her name is Théagète, and she will spend the rest of her myth trying not to be seen. The world feels higher here. Thinner. The trees are sparser, the air sharper, and the sky somehow closer, as though the mountain itself is trying to slip quietly into the stars. You walk among 7 sisters, their laughter distant but bright, their footsteps light on stone. They move like deer, graceful, alert, always half vanished. These are the Pleiades, and one of them, the quiet one, keeps glancing over her shoulder. That's Théagète, she's the one who hides. The Pleiades were daughters of Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold up the sky, and the Oceanid Pleione. Born of burden and sea foam, they shimmered through myth as mountain nymphs and celestial dancers. Zeus noticed them, of course. You knew he would. He always does, but Théagète. He wanted her especially. The myths don't agree on what happened next. Some say she fled the moment he appeared, vanishing into groves and caverns. Others say he caught her, disguised as Artemis, a callback to the deception he used on Callisto. But all versions agree on this. Théagète begged for escape, and Artemis, perhaps remembering her own ruined companions, took pity. She turned Théagète into a doe. A fleet-footed deer with silver eyes and legs like whispers. Free to run. And she did, farther than the myths could follow, but not forever. Zeus still found her. Maybe not right away. Maybe not all at once. But the myth ends with her pregnant. Alone. A nymph no longer, she gives birth to a son, Lacedaemon, who would go on to found the city of Sparta. Yes, that's Sparta. The land of discipline and war cries and men raised to fight from birth. Funny, isn't it? That such a brutal place could trace its lineage back to a woman who spent her whole story running, and after that, Théagète disappears again. Some say Artemis turned her into a star. That's where you can find her tonight, up there, near Taurus, nestled among her sisters as part of the constellation Pleiades. The problem is, she's the dim one. Literally, in the night sky, one of the 7 stars is harder to see. Faint. Flickering. Astronomers call it the lost Pleiad. And that's Théagète. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Early myths suggested the faintness of her star was due to shame, that Théagète, unlike her sisters, had been touched by Zeus and could no longer shine as brightly. Imagine being cosmically dimmed because a god wouldn't leave you alone. Historians still argue whether the story of the Pleiades was meant to map celestial navigation, reflect seasonal change, or simply turn female fear into stargazing material. Either way, Théagète lives on as a spark just out of reach. Not because she failed to escape, but because her escape was never meant to last. You sit now beneath her dim glow, the sky arching above you like a frozen wave. You trace her movement, one star among many, and feel her slipping between myths, barely mentioned, almost forgotten, but the mountain rumbles beneath you, because the next story isn't light, it isn't graceful, it's buried deep, trembling in the dark soil where gods hide their regrets. Elara is waiting, and what she's hiding will shake the world. The ground beneath you is no longer firm. It swells and sinks like a heartbeat, like something breathing beneath the crust. You're not on a mountain anymore. You're below it, or rather, beneath the earth itself. It's damp here. Still. Oppressively quiet. But not empty. Not safe. Something stirs in the darkness, and Elara is curled above it, whispering lullabies to the soil. Elara, a mortal princess. A name barely spoken, even in the oldest myths, yet her story holds the weight of giants. Literally, Zeus found her, as he always does. This time, she was the daughter of King Orchomenus, known for her beauty and quiet grace. But even beauty became a liability when Zeus passed through. Hera, as always, was watching, and for once, Zeus seemed to know he'd gone too far, so he did something odd, something strangely considerate. He hid Alara underground, not metaphorically, he physically tucked her away beneath the surface of the earth, planting her like a secret. Why? Because she was pregnant with his child, and this child would be enormous. Enter Tydeus. A giant of such monstrous scale that he began to grow too large for the womb. Some say he kicked so hard, the dirt cracked. Others insist his heartbeat was mistaken for earthquakes. Alara, trapped in her subterranean prison, grew weaker as her son grew stronger. Eventually, she died, consumed, some say, from within. Others suggest her body simply couldn't hold what Olympus had forced into her, but Tydeus was born, and the world trembled. Zeus, having lost Alara, now had a problem, a half-mortal son the size of a fortress and the emotional stability of a kicked hornet's nest. Tydeus grew, roamed, and did what many children of gods do, made very poor decisions. One day, he attacked Leda, the mother of Apollo and Artemis, as she walked through a sacred grove. The reasons vary. Some say it was lust. Others, madness. Regardless, he was struck down by her children, and his punishment? Eternal. He was cast into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, where 2 vultures were assigned to feast forever on his liver. Just like Prometheus. Just like all those who dared too much. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The punishment of Tydeus was cited by later philosophers as an allegory for unchecked desire, an appetite that regenerates no matter how often it's punished. The liver was considered the seat of passion in ancient Greek medicine, so the symbolism was delightfully gruesome. Your quirky tidbit? Some obscure cults believe Tydeus wasn't a villain at all, but a victim. A being born wrong, buried too soon, lashed out because he never knew the sky. One ancient fragment even calls him the sun who never saw the stars. And Alara, she gets no monument. No temple, she's remembered, if at all, as the Earth Mother of Tydeus. Her tragedy is one of erasure, buried before the pain, and then buried again after it, but you can feel her now, can't you, in the soil beneath your bed, in the quiet pressure of forgotten griefs. She lingers where the roots don't dare grow, where memory seeps deeper than myth. You rise, the earth falls away, and now, you're floating, drifting through gaps in the mythos so thin they barely exist. Whispers gather here. Unfinished stories. Names with no endings. One of them rises toward you, Pluto, the woman who vanished so thoroughly, historians can't even agree she was ever real. You are drifting now. Slowly, soundlessly, without resistance. It is as if even memory itself has loosened its grip, allowed its fingers to relax, and let you slip gently through. The world around you has dimmed, not into darkness, but into something pale and hushed. The air is thinner, lighter, as if made not of oxygen, but of the breath held between 2 thoughts. It feels like a dream just before waking. That brief, quiet space where form begins to dissolve and certainty fades into suggestion. Here, there is no sky to orient you. No ground to steady your steps. No mountain to ascend or descend. You are no longer held by the usual coordinates. Place has become meaningless. Time stretches out like a smooth sheet. No longer divided into past or future. Only the present remains, and even that feels fragile, ready to evaporate with the next exhale. Fog surrounds you. Not the biting kind that clings to your skin, but a gentle sort of blankness. It curls around you softly, folding itself like a forgotten shawl laid across your shoulders. There is no wind, yet you move forward. Not by any force you can name, but by something quieter, something more inevitable. A current that does not push or pull, only carries, and within that fog, within the hush that feels deeper than silence, something begins to stir. It does not burst forward. It does not shout. It begins as a suggestion. A murmur at the very edge of awareness. It brushes the corner of your thoughts like a shadow sliding over silk. A whisper that has no voice, only presence. It does not ask for attention. It merely arrives, Pluto. The name hovers in the air, weightless and without anchor. It floats there without story, without image, without grandeur. Not Persephone. Not Demeter. Not Hera or Leto. Not any of the goddesses carved into temple walls or praised in marble verse. Not one of the names that echoes through liturgy or inspires offerings. Pluto belongs elsewhere. She is a different kind of figure. Something less obvious. Something quieter. Something you might overlook if you blinked too long. She does not announce herself. She does not walk through the pages of mythology with thunder at her heels. She lingers at the edge, a name scribbled in the margins of a crumbling scroll. A murmur pressed into parchment that is already flaking away. Her story is not absent because it was never there. It is absent because it was removed, and yet, even in this absence, she feels vivid. More present than some of the louder names. More insistent, even in her silence. There is a resonance to her stillness, a kind of echo that grows louder the longer you listen. What is missing often speaks more honestly than what remains. In her silence, you find something raw. Something important. She appears only sparingly in ancient texts. Her lineage is a guessing game. Perhaps she was the daughter of Hemas. Or maybe of Cronus. Or even the child of the ocean itself, if one accepts a different version. The sources do not agree. The genealogies clash like gossip passed around a table where no one remembers the full story. Princess, nymph, divine placeholder. She shifts shape depending on which scrap of papyrus you hold in your hand, but there is one point of agreement: Pluto bore a child, and not just any child. Her son was Tantalus, yes. That Tantalus. The one punished in the underworld, suspended forever between hunger and thirst, surrounded by what he could never have. But that comes later. For now, it is Pluto who matters. Pluto, who exists in the myth for one specific reason. To carry. To birth. To disappear. She was not swept into legend on the back of a shining god. There was no thunderous courtship, no bull appearing from the sea, no eagle descending from Olympus. There were no feathers or golden storms or radiant disguises. There was no spectacle. No wonder. Only a single sentence. A short notation. A quiet acknowledgement that she became pregnant. That she gave birth. And then, silence. There is no detail about how she felt. No mention of her face or voice. No description of her dreams or fears or desires. No trace of whether she resisted or embraced what came. The myths do not ask. The myths do not care. She is written, briefly, and then she is gone. Was she loved? Was she afraid? Did she hope for more? Did she resist the path drawn for her? The myths offer nothing. Some scholars argue that Pluto was never meant to be a real character. Perhaps she was added later, slipped into the story like a correction. A placeholder to explain the divine lineage of a mortal man who became infamous. A name inserted to connect dots. To tie a bloodline together. Her existence, they suggest, was a matter of necessity, not narrative, and yet, her story is not neutral, because her son did not vanish. Tantalus rose high. He ruled as king of Sypolis. He dined with gods. He was invited to Olympus. For a time, he thrived. He tasted divine privilege. He moved among immortals. But he did what so many mortals do in myths. He overstepped, he betrayed their trust. He stole ambrosia. He brought secrets back to earth. And then, in the most disturbing version of the tale, he invited the gods to a feast and served them his own son in a stew. A horrific act that shattered the divine hospitality. A transgression that earned a punishment as eternal as it was ironic. Placed in a pool, the water always pulled away from his lips. Surrounded by fruit, the branches always swayed out of reach. Tantalus became the embodiment of unfulfilled desire. A hunger that never ends. A thirst that can never be eased. But through it all, through his rise and fall, through his crime and his sentence, Pluto is never named again. She is not consulted. She is not blamed. She is not even mentioned. No one asks what she thought of her son's ascension. No one wonders if she wept for his fate. No lines are given to her voice. No lament is recorded in her name. Her silence is not a decision. It is an omission. It is clean. It is final, and yet, hidden deep in the folds of forgotten texts, there are whispers. Not stories. Not hymns. But fragments. A few traces that hint at something more. In the quietest places, in mountains too remote for temples, in caves where offerings were left in secret, there may have been recognition. There may have been reverence. Her name bears resemblance to Pluto's, the spirit of wealth and abundance. Perhaps the confusion allowed her to be worshipped, or at least acknowledged. Perhaps, in some lonely shrine, a small lamp was lit for her. Perhaps a grain offering was left beneath the sky. Not in marble sanctuaries, not in the centers of great cities, but in places where the air still holds breath and the stones remember, not a goddess of vengeance. Not a deity of triumph. But a woman whose presence lingered like a caution. A mother who gave birth to a warning, and in this, something larger emerges, a pattern made not of grand legends, but of omissions. Of women whose lives end where someone else's story begins. Pluto is not alone. She joins a long procession. Callisto. Aegina. Ilara. Mnemosyne. Each one a vessel. Each one remembered only in relation to someone else. Their narratives vanish the moment they fulfill a role. This is not about a single erasure. This is a system, and now, you begin to understand something deeper. Something darker. Zeus does not merely appear. He does not simply seduce. He transforms, he distorts. He wraps himself in illusion not only to win consent, but to avoid consequence. The bull, the swan, the mist, the gold. These were not costumes of beauty. They were strategies. They were shields. Every shape he took was a layer between himself and what followed. A way to take without being seen for what he was, and now the question rises, what happens when those disguises are removed? What remains when you stop accepting the mask as the truth? You are about to find out, because your next breath will carry you into the center of it all. Into the very storm that churns at the heart of myth. Into the furnace where love becomes theater, and desire becomes distortion. Into the moment where the stories stop being stories and start becoming something else. Here, every transformation contains a question. Here, every costume contains an answer, and that answer has been waiting for you. Just beneath the surface. Just behind the curtain, waiting to be seen, waiting to be named, waiting to be understood. The disguises are circling you now, not with warmth, not with welcome, but with a strange, weightless pressure that seems to come from within the air itself. They glide through the mist like memories that were never yours, like guests who arrived long after the music stopped, each one draped in silence too deep to disturb. This is not a masquerade where laughter rises and masks are worn for joy. This is something older. This is a procession of illusions, and none of them look at you, but all of them know you are here. Horns gleam dimly in the fog, catching glints of light that do not seem to have a source. Somewhere nearby, a pair of wings unfolds, stirring the fog into eddies that brush softly across your cheek like a forgotten breath. A feather floats downward, impossibly light, and lands near your shoulder before vanishing into the air. You turn, slowly, and find yourself face to face with the graceful curve of a swan's neck, impossibly pale and glowing with a light that seems to hum rather than shine. Then it glides backward, swallowed again by vapor. A massive shape moves behind a screen of cloud, the slow, deliberate steps of a bull. You can feel its weight without hearing its tread, as if the earth itself is remembering the shape of its passage. And somewhere beyond the reach of your eyes, just at the edge of where thought meets dream, a flicker of gold flashes once and then disappears the moment you blink. It leaves no trail. It leaves no warmth. These forms, these shapes, these illusions, they are beautiful. No one could deny that. They shimmer with a kind of elegance that seems carefully curated, sculpted to captivate and designed to hold your attention. They are glowing and ethereal, works of art cut from starlight and smoke. But that beauty is not comfort. That beauty is not kindness. The more you look, the colder it becomes. Because beauty, in this place, is a snare. It is the softness that hides the teeth. The velvet wrapped around the hook. You begin to feel it now, deep and certain, pressing against the inside of your chest. The understanding lands like a pebble dropped into still water, and the ripple spreads through your limbs. None of them are real. You are not inside a story anymore. You are not standing alongside Europa, or Io, or Semele. You are somewhere older than any single tale. You are standing at the core. Not at the heart of one myth, but at the very heart of the pattern. This is not a tangle of disconnected fables. It is not a coincidence that the stories align. You begin to see the truth beneath the surface. You begin to glimpse the shape that lies beneath the embroidery. This is a system. This is a design. This is a machine, and its workings are precise. Each myth, each shimmering disguise, each story that begins with awe and ends with silence, fits neatly into place like the teeth of a gear. These are not accidents. They are repetitions. Carefully maintained rituals performed again and again beneath the golden banner of divinity. Every shape shift. Every transformation. Every appearance cloaked in feathers or fire or brilliance. These were not acts of wonder. They were choices, they were tactics. At the center of this intricate machinery stands Zeus, the king of the gods, the master of thunder, the architect of so many masks. You know his name. Everyone does. He rules the skies and the stories told by countless voices across time. He hurls lightning. He sits on Olympus, surrounded by glory. But here, within the stillness, where the disguises no longer dazzle and the fog no longer conceals, you begin to see something else. He is not just a king, he is a performer. Zeus, the all-powerful, did not always arrive bearing his own face. In fact, he rarely did. He almost never appeared as himself. And you begin to understand why. The true Zeus, with his roaring power, his overwhelming force, his divine radiance too fierce to look upon, was too dangerous. Too intense. Too likely to provoke fear. Too likely to be denied, so he changed, he became something different. Something gentler. Something stranger. Something easier to say yes to. Or at least, harder to say no to, and every time he transformed, a story began, a story that looked like wonder, a story that ended in silence. Each mask was a doorway, and behind every doorway was a woman walking into something she could not yet name. Europa saw a bull, strong and gentle, and laughed as she climbed onto its back. She did not know the ride would not stop. She did not know it would carry her away from the world she knew, into a life shaped by someone else's will. Io did not even remain in her own skin. She became a cow, mute and terrified, her voice stolen, her eyes wide with confusion. Her body no longer hers. Her story no longer hers. Danaë was locked in a chamber of bronze. She saw only light, gold pouring down like molten silence. She was given no face to resist, only brilliance and consequence. She was bathed in radiance that shimmered but did not speak. Callisto felt safe. She believed she was in the company of Artemis, the huntress she loved and trusted. But the face she reached toward was not a goddess. It was Zeus, wearing the shape of a friend. Leda met a swan. The feathers were soft, the neck graceful, the movements serene. But the eyes were too still, too cold. And within that stillness was a hunger cloaked in white. Antiope fled from the shame that grew faster than footsteps. Her story blurred beneath the pounding of hooves. The god's shadow followed close behind, always a breath away. Aegina transformed herself, or was transformed, into a deer. Sleek and fast and desperate. But even in this shape, even with all her speed, she could not outrun what hunted her. Pluto did not even speak. Her name appears briefly, attached only to the child she bore. Her voice is never recorded. Her choice never considered. Even Mnemosyne, who seemed to step into her moment willingly, found her identity stretched and reshaped. Time bent around her during those 9 nights. Memory itself shifted to hold the weight of what had happened. She became a vessel rather than a woman, and Semele, so full of love, so full of faith, asked to see the truth. She asked to see Zeus without illusion. She asked to see the god behind the mask. And the vision destroyed her. Again and again, the same script. Again and again, the same deception. Each name a variation. Each setting a new stage. But always, always, the same result. And what did Zeus do? He left. He vanished before the dust settled. He did not stay to explain. He did not remain to hold a hand or bear a burden. He departed, leaving behind the aftermath. A daughter transformed into a distant star. A son burdened with prophecy. A woman whose name echoed without context, her legacy reduced to a footnote in someone else's epic. He never offered apology. He never sought to repair what had been broken. Here is what the historians will tell you. The poets and playwrights of ancient Greece were not blind to this pattern. They knew the shape of the stories. They saw the repetition. The phrase Zeus's lovers became a category. A signal. A shorthand for beauty that ended in sorrow. Even the Roman poet Ovid, centuries later, laced his metamorphoses with unease. The transformations were not framed as freedom. They were framed as wounds. The shift in form became a metaphor for something else entirely. Something closer to trauma. And here is your strange, quiet fact. The disguises were mocked. In the comedies of the time, Zeus's performances were exaggerated and laughed at. The swan was clumsy. The bull was absurd. The god became a figure of ridicule. A being so incapable of connection that he had to wear a new face just to be near. The laughter told the truth no one dared to say aloud. This was not romance. This was theater, and you, standing here among the fog and feathers, begin to see it for what it truly is. You see the masks. You see the craftsmanship. You see how fragile they are. And you understand what lies behind each one, not myth. Not miracle. Not love, a woman, a girl, a presence who said no. Or who was never given the chance to speak. You remain still. You do not move. You do not look away, you listen, and in the silence that follows the unraveling, something stirs, not a cry. Not a scream. Just a low, steady hum. Like breath beneath the surface. Like voices returning, not victims, not forgotten, echoes, waiting for someone to listen. Not for rescue. Not for vengeance, only for recognition, and that is where you go now. Not into the myths as they were written by the victors and the poets. But into the spaces those stories were built to obscure. Into the silence that fell like a curtain. Into the shadows that stretch beyond the borders of Olympus, where the masks fall apart. Where the names begin to return, where the forgotten women of the old world wait to be seen. The stage is quiet now. Not just still, but hushed in a way that suggests something has ended, as though a breath has been held for too long and finally released into silence. The gods have retreated, their golden halls sealed behind curtains of cloud and distant mountaintops. No one lingers in the corridors of Olympus. No thunder rumbles in the background. The disguises that once shimmered so brightly have vanished. They have melted into mist, into legend, leaving behind no feathers on the floor, no faint hoofprints across the marble, no trails of golden dust clinging to the air, and what remains before you is something much simpler. A room. Empty of gods. Empty of glory. Filled only with quiet and with chairs. Rows of chairs, plain in their shape, but carved with names that history was in no hurry to remember. These are not thrones wrapped in velvet. They are not pedestals of triumph. They are chairs meant for sitting, for waiting, for being forgotten. You walk among them. Slowly, carefully, as though each step might awaken something slumbering beneath your feet. The wooden floor beneath you groans, but not from age. It creaks from memory. From the weight of what was never said aloud. From the pressure of voices that were never written down. What should have been carved into marble was instead whispered once and then lost to time. This is not a place of war. It is not a temple. It is not a court. It is something smaller. Something softer. This is the aftermath. This is the quiet that settles after the stories have ended. This is where the women lived, not the grand queens held up in golden portraits. Not the calm-faced mothers immortalized in mosaics beside their divine children. These are not the names sung in epics or inked in scrolls to be memorized by scholars. These are the ones who blinked when the sky closed its eye. Who whispered after the bards stopped singing. Who held the pieces that myths refused to carry. You pause beside each chair, and as you do, something begins to stir. You remember, Europa, abandoned on the shores of Crete. Her laughter left behind in another country. Her story rewritten until she became the proud mother of kings, her beginning stripped of its sorrow. Io, still pacing along the Bosporus, watching the tides roll and roll, hoping each wave might carry away the shape she had been forced to wear. Callisto, her body turned to starlight, her story caught in the orbit of silence. Never allowed to stop. Never allowed to return. Danaë, moving quietly among the statues of her son. Each monument a reminder of power built on intrusion. Each face carved in triumph, while her own was never considered part of the victory. Semele, barely more than ash. Her name echoed in awe, but not in grief. Her presence remembered in flame, but not in voice. Leda, holding the shell that once cradled a future. Trying to mother what myth had birthed. Wondering if love could truly reach what had never been meant to be understood. Alcmene, raising twins whose eyes carried different fates. One with mortal questions. One with divine purpose. And neither entirely hers. Antiope, treading paths that spiraled endlessly through the mountains. Learning that surviving was not the same as healing. That breath did not always bring freedom. Aegina, seated on her unwanted island, surrounded by beings she never chose. Her name whispered by wind. Not sung in celebration. Mnemosyne, deep in her cave, holding all the names that were forgotten. All the truths that were buried. All the songs that were never finished. Her silence held stories heavier than any thunderbolt. Ganymede, eternal in beauty, trapped in time. Pouring drinks for gods who never once asked if he remembered how it felt to be free. Aegina, barely visible in the sky. The dimmest of the sisters, the one who ran, the one who flickers just enough to remind you she is still there. Elara, pressed into the ground to protect what she carried. Her name buried with her. Her body turned into a warning. Pluto, nothing more than a name in the margins. Known only through her son's ruin. Her voice never recorded. Her pain never asked about. They are all here. Every one. Not grand. Not immortalized. But present. The women whose names you were never taught to repeat. The ones the myths used as stepping stones to tell someone else's tale, they were seen. They were chased. They were persuaded, or deceived, or seized. They were changed into creatures, into silence, into starlight. And then, when their usefulness ended, they were allowed to vanish. Even those who were given what might pass for resolution were only remembered through the triumphs of their sons. Or through cities named after them like trophies. Their own dreams, their own voices, were rarely part of the record, and in the wake of it all, what did Zeus leave behind? Constellations. Glimmering from above. Each one a story scrubbed of its ache. Each one a monument carved in light but rooted in loss, cities. Stamped with names of women who never asked to become landmarks, dynasties. Legacies built on beginnings wrapped in silence, and above all, he left behind quiet. Here is your final historical fact. For all the power and color and poetry of these myths, they were mostly written by men. Ancient Greece was not a place that welcomed women as storytellers. And so, the stories that remain reflect what a patriarchal world chose to see. They turned pursuit into poetry. They turned violation into divine romance. And now, your last small truth. In a few places, a few dusty corners of the ancient world, the women touched by gods were remembered differently. Not as lovers, not as mothers of heroes, but as holders of knowledge. Io, who learned to see through pain, became a symbol of prophecy. Callisto, guardian of the wild, kept watch over the edges of the known world. Mnemosyne, always Mnemosyne, held every forgotten name like it was her own, but even these traditions are debated. Were they genuine reverence, or just another layer of myth wrapped around old wounds? You sit now at the center of the quiet. Surrounded by the chairs. Their shapes begin to blur. Their details begin to fade. But before they vanish entirely, you pause, and in that moment, you hear something, not shouting. Not weeping. Just a shift. A breath. A murmur rising in the silence, a remembering, because these women, pushed aside and pared down, did not vanish completely. Their presence remained. Their influence rippled through centuries. Their stories cracked the surface of Olympus. Even if the cracks were papered over with gold, names may fade. Stories may twist. But what they left behind lingers. You see it now. The names, carried like wind. The stories, surfacing like waves. The stars, still burning. Some faint. Some flickering. Some almost gone. But none completely lost. You take one last look at this place of myth and memory. The chairs dissolve into air. The room fades into mist, and now, there is only you, and quiet, and sleep. You are lying still now. Wrapped in warmth. Anchored by your own breath. The weight of the blanket is gentle, like a memory settling over you. You feel yourself drifting, your thoughts loosening like petals released from their stems. Behind your closed eyes, Olympus dims. The drama recedes. The gods retreat to their mountaintops, and their stories, once bright and burning, now flicker faintly in the distance. The disguises are gone. The voices have quieted. The myths have spent themselves, their edges dulled by reflection. There is no more chasing. No more shifting shapes. No more thunder pretending to be love. Only quiet. Only memory. The kind that moves softly. The kind that waits. The women you met tonight do not call out. They do not plead. They do not demand remembrance. They simply remain. Their presence faint but firm. Their stories like lanterns lit in the corners of dreams. You remember Europa, beneath the sea-colored sky. You remember Semele, and the flash that ended everything. You remember Aegina, flickering quietly above. You breathe. Gently. Deeply. The breath of someone who has listened, and understood. The breath of someone who has seen the shadows beneath the light. Let the gods stay distant. Let Olympus keep its golden gates. You have walked beyond their stories. You have sat with the women the myths tried to forget, and now, at last, you sleep. Let the legends unravel, softly, in the quiet of your dreams. Let the names rise, one by one, like stars reclaiming the night. Let the silence surround you, not as absence, but as peace. Tomorrow, there will be new stories. New voices. New myths waiting to be written. But tonight, this one is finished.